analytical work group. Last time, that was great accomplishment, and we had talked about accelerating our schedule to accommodate some timeline reduction strategies and requests, and so we thought we would be moving on into potency and heavy metals sooner than later. So we're sort of in a little bit of a transition period here, and that's sort of why we have the light agenda. So let's start with the introductions to make sure we know everybody who's here. So I'm Annette Hoffman. I'm the chair of the Cannabis Scientific Task Force. You know, a different order of acronym might have been a little bit easier. We just get stuck on this one so often.
Ryan Zabralski, PT work group leader and with ecology.
And I think you guys all, I talked about Ryan coming, I think, at our last steering committee meeting. So I just want to say that we're all really happy to have him on board, and he jumped right in and already led his first work group meeting, so it's going really well. And I'm Jessica with ecology.
Marlon Poole, ecology. Melissa Peter, ecology.
Paris the Carrot, ecology.
I remember I was from
Dick Mosley with confidence analytics.
Tanya Sasaki, confidence analytics.
Jen Carlson with ecology. Okay, and that's everybody in the room. And now here comes the hard part, trying to get everybody on the phone to announce themselves and do the best we can.
Sound off.
And if you're trying to say something, you may still be muted, so hang on, give us just a second. Okay, so we're good now. So let's see if, let me go down the list for task force members. Department of Ag.
Brad Mike Sherman, Department of Ag.
Okay, Brad and Mike are here. Liquor Cannabis. Yeah, would you? Okay, we'll go check and see if they're waiting in the queue. Department of Health.
Hi, this is Shelley Rowden from the Department of Health.
Great, Shelley. Appreciate that. Are there other task members? Nick? I'm sorry, Jeff? Nick is right in front of me. Is Jeff on the phone? Is he unmuted? Jeff, are you on the phone? Perhaps you're muted on your end?
Oh, he says I am here.
Okay, all right. You're here. So, few technical difficulties, but great. Good to know that you're here. We're just going to wait a couple minutes to see if we have our liquor and cannabis task force members in our lobby. So we're going to go on mute just for a minute. And what? Oh.
Someone just joined?
Did someone just? Well, we got this one beeping a lot. So.
Is that because we're very popular and we have many listeners?
That could be.
They can send me a message.
Okay. For those on the phone, yeah, if you could just chat your name to the WebEx, we'll know who you are. Well, while we're waiting for liquor cannabis, let me just thank everybody. We've come a long way. We've been meeting since August. It's been a heavy workload for everyone, and I was brand new to the field and to ecology when we started. So you guys have done a lot of heavy lifting, and I just wanted to extend my appreciation for that. That was I think we've come a long way, and I think we're in it feels to me like we're in a really good place. And so when we get a little bit further, I'll share with you where I think we are versus where we're going. So.
Well, I'll share that the Cannabis Alliance is a industry association here in the state. We had our lobby day on Tuesday, so we went around the hill and talked to our representatives, including Representative Stanford, who sponsored the bill. Well, this was his bill, House Bill 2052, which created this task force.
Great.
So we got a little bit of time to talk to him, just give him some feedback about way things are going. I told him that, thanked him for putting this together for us, and told him we were working diligently on it. We've definitely received a lot of feedback about the timeline, right? Everybody wants it to go faster.
Yep.
He's heard that from many angles.
Understandably.
I told him, I think that we're moving pretty fast, and there's a lot on it.
It's a heavy lift.
It's a really heavy lift.
It's a very heavy lift.
The timeline, well, everybody wants an immediate fix. I think we're doing about as fast as we can. So I reiterated that to him, and he was very appreciative.
Great. Thanks for doing that. I think the relationships that we've been building through this work in the task force has been just really great. I think I've gotten to know the other agencies better, Ag Health and Liquor Cannabis, and that's been fantastic. Really good working relationships there. And you guys, all the labs and staff that have stepped up to help us, the work groups and the steering committee. It's really it just feels like a really good effort, really good collaboration. Word I was searching for. Kendra, hi.
Hello.
Hi. Here, I'll move down. Whoever, if you don't want us to, if you want to turn the fan off, go ahead. The room was so warm when we got in here.
Our room is the exact opposite. It's totally like an
we don't
ice
have
box.
heat, so
Your building's cold.
Good to see you.
Aren't you in, I guess, in a new building?
I was going to say, isn't it a brand new building?
It's refurbished. Isn't it a refurbished building?
it is actually we were in that building 25 years ago before they switched to the building that was on Pacific, so.
What's happening in that building? I drove by. Like construction's going on.
I had heard that
Sold it to somebody.
the landlord had a tenant.
It wasn't owned by the state?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a light agenda today. And I think we're gonna start off, so Ryan has joined the ecology team and is now our PT lead. And you missed the introduction, I think, but there's been one PT meeting since then, and they have in motion. So I'm gonna let Ryan take that on and walk us through it.
So, I think it'd be better if I go through the whole presentation I have first, and the motion will kind of pop up when I get to
The end of that.
when I get to the end, and it'll get touched on kind of in the middle, but, so what I was gonna say is, if you guys have some, like, brief questions while I'm going through this, don't feel free to ask, but if you have something that's like a big conceptual, like, open discussion kind of question, let's wait, for that till the end, just so we can get through, the presentation. So. Alrighty, so, do we have a?
I don't think I actually.
All
Oh,
right.
that's great.
This is PDF.
Cool. So in attendance was myself, Sarah, and Alyssa from ecology, and Steve on the phone with DOH. Nick Coleman was there from WSLCB. Then our other new member from WSDA, Qingfen Wu, on the phone. Laboratory representatives Jay Burns from Treeline and Steve Loeb from Integrity were there. And actually, I'll jump to that one to the next slide. So start off giving personnel introductions, myself and Qingfen, just kind of telling our story of how we got to where we are here. So we didn't necessarily, we kind of noticed that Tabor wasn't there when we had the meeting, so we did a little digging since then. It looks like he has moved on from practice, and we have not been able to get a hold of him. So I'll touch back on this again, but I think we're going to need to pull for another person from the laboratories into this work group, just because we're starting to get really imbalanced between the agencies and the labs. So, and followed up with Sarah gave a really good brief synopsis of our last meeting and a little bit of an update on where she's at with the legislative report. So, let off the meeting talking about the gold standard, what we think a cannabis proficiency testing program should look like perfect world, where we don't have any of the challenges that we currently face in this market. So we start off with just ideals, just perfect world. The in-matrix PT for every single analyte and every single method parameter between, so you'd have a separate PT for pesticides in flour and pesticides in concentrates or whatever. It'd be broken down similar to the model of the ecology model. We would, based on sound science, have what needs to be incurred, and what can be spiked into the PTs. And we also discussed that this might not be achievable to get to this pie in the sky. So we led into discussions of what challenges we have. Yes.
So I'm still don't know all the lingo. I understand what spiked is. I don't understand what does incurred mean.
Incurred would be, so for example, for pesticides, those would be things that are in the plant, not spiked on top, that are found in the plant itself, not spiked on top.
Okay.
So
Whatever is already there.
correct.
Okay.
So then we discuss challenges. So we don't have similar to, or in ecology, we have kind of the EPA as what would fill the role that we've decided in the client for providing technical and regulatory guidance. Products can't cross state lines between two states that have it legalized. We have to source from retail right now with unknown background concentrations, and then the difficulties that we have in segregating the matrices from each other. We really dug into that later on in the meeting, so I'll touch on that more there, but that's going to take up a lot of our time going forward, is kind of defining what the matrices are. So next topic was we gave a little bit of a quick 30,000 view of what the two programs look like. For ecology, we have 6 approved providers. We must do 2 PTs per method and parameter per year. After you do 2 successful without failure in a year, you're allowed to go down to 1, and you only have to do 1 a year until you have a failure. Then you have to do 2 more successive inline passes the next year before you can go back to 1.
And this is providers for environmental data.
This is for environmental accreditation. So WSDA is a little bit different. They roll through all the commodities throughout the year, and Chingfed said they do somewhere about 2 or 3 per year. The only providers they have are the California, I should have wrote this out, California Department of
Food and Ag?
Food and Ag, yes. And FAPAS is is a commercial.
I don't know.
We couldn't figure out what.
Okay.
I don't know if it stands for anything, because I looked on their website and I couldn't find what it stood for. It just said FAPAS. So,
Rolls off the tongue.
so yeah, they do, those are their 2 providers, and they typically do 2 or 3 commodities a year. So this rolled into, my notes here. I can't remember if it was, who it was, it might have been Jay or Steve that brought up the FANOVA option that has been presented to the steering committee in the past. I think it would be a great intermediate option because it's ready to go. It'd be in matrix and customizable. It wouldn't be incurred, it'd all be spiked, but we customize the list based on what we need. The cost would be split among participating laboratories, and it would also be ISO accredited, which I'll get more onto that on the next slide. But not quite. But there are challenges that were some questions we had of, does he create excess product? And if he does, where does it get stored? We don't really have an answer for that. And the bigger question we ran into is what happens when a lab fails?
So just as an offer, I know we've talked about this a little bit before, the ready to go right away is not accurate.
Is it not?
No, right, they have to have a lab space and they have to have permissions to be able to carry above the individual permissions, which means there has to either be rule change or agreements made. So this is not we we can do this tomorrow and they're gonna show up.
And I don't think that's what, I mean, it's more than designing a whole entire plan.
They already have a scheme
They,
designed.
they've got,
Okay.
But it's
got-
good to be aware
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
that in terms of
Yeah.
the timeline.
so if the statement was that, ready to go, I mean, yes, of course, there's.
We don't have to tell him what to do, he just
Yeah.
kind of comes in and says, what's your list? And
Yeah, yeah, there's some.
Maybe a
legit-
better term is
material did you say
feasible
you
than
needed?
feasible.
Yeah, how much material needs to be sent?
Or,
He actually,
So maybe
had
one
it,
conversation at a time, just
Yeah.
for the folks on the phone.
he actually, stated he only needed a couple grams of it, so.
oh,
Yeah.
well, that's under the possession limit,
Yeah.
an ounce, right? Possession limit, ounce? Correct.
Per person, per,
Well, you can bring a buddy and then have some.
I mean, I guess, like, the issue of excess product, I mean, what is this, a medium-sized storage bin? Meaning, can
Not
the
even, right? An
Department of
ounce is
Ag Analytical Lab
Yeah.
store this on a shelf somewhere in a fridge,
there's-
So
like?
these are all questions that the work group is gonna need to discuss more.
Yes.
It's just to bring that FANOVA back into,
Right.
into the conversation, a little bit, just to see if that's, something that everybody wanted to consider going down. So it was just to bring it back in, because we had a little bit of a break, so.
Yeah.
But what you mean, because it's relative to cannabis. The other things that we just have seen was relative to environmental data and agricultural data. So
Yeah.
right now,
This one would get us started a little sooner.
Yes.
if we ask.
Possibly.
Ryan, can you explain, a little bit more about, just so everybody understands, what happens when a lab fails? Could you explain why that's an issue a little bit more?
Yeah, so, I'll use an environmental example just because that's a little bit easier, for me to bring up. So if a lab submits has a PT and they have, let's say for 8260 volatile analyses, and they have just one analyte fails, what they have to do is within the next, assuming that it's not the most recent PT, say they're doing 2 a year, and they have one analyte failure, and then they pass it again later in the year, the next year, that analyte needs to pass twice. So, that's kind of where it gets a little bit hairier in the bigger analyte list, but that's kind of the basic rundown is, as long as your most recent failure, or your most recent PT isn't a failure, you are good to go. Keep going forward without having to do what would call a rapid return, which is you order a special PT on your own and submit it. So it's usually, the onus is on the labs to, if they have a failure and they know they're not scheduled to have another PT before the end of the year, they need to order it.
Can you explain how this is different than, with environmental labs when they fail a PT or agricultural
See, I don't know if I can speak much to the agricultural side of
or
it, but
environmental?
yeah, so,
I was talking more about the issue of like them being out of state and what that.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because environmental labs, we don't have any restrictions on the product, on the PT product, they can get it right away. They can call up FANOVA or whoever their provider is, and
So they can get rapid turn tests.
they can get something in a couple weeks, where
Nova has to come and gear up.
in our case, the question that was presented is like, do we fly tie back out here all on the failing labs budget, or how does that work? So, I shot him an email and asked him, what happens when a lab fails, because there's no way a lab's not failed in the other states for something at this point. And he got back to me a couple days ago and says he creates, I'm gonna pull up his email real quick. I believe what he said, if I remember correctly, is he creates a backup lot for such cases.
There's just a question where that gets stored in the interim.
Yes, and that's kind of where the storage
That's
question
that
came up.
excess, I see. Yeah, yeah.
Mini fridge under my desk.
But that is one of the things
Double box sandwich.
we had talked about is, if he had to fly back out, because initially you would think that he would come and he would be doing the PTs for all the labs, so the cost would be
Right, shared.
shared.
Yeah.
But then if only one lab fails or two lab
Failures
fails,
become
do
very
they
costly.
pay for, do they pay for the full cost of him coming back and doing that again, or how would that work?
So what he wrote to me is, we do have a small backup study prepped and ready for failures. This is even true for cannabinoids and marijuana. I manufacture several lots and label them in the case of Oregon for Orlap, and direct the distribution through their lab facility. They have the appropriate refrigeration and storage to hold lots over a period of time, so I do not have to necessarily return to do a corrective action study. So, that was 7:30 on Tuesday is when I got that, so it's happened since I kind of started working on this. So, the rest of the proficiency team, I don't know if they've seen that, if I've been able to forward that to all of them yet. So rolling into the ISO accreditation. So, this was something we thought was required, or not required, but something we need to present. ISO 43 and 34 are two accreditations that all the PT providers approved by the state for ecology are 43 accredited. I think one or two of them are not 34 because they're a little bit different. ISO 17043 provides general guidelines for PT providers, and it's not limited to these three things, but I think these three things are the highlights from 43 that we need to take a look at. They outline study design requirements, data analysis requirements, and then confidentiality between the provider and all the other labs. And the labs aren't communicating with each other. For obvious kind of, and it would kind of invalidate the study in that case. So that's 43. For 34, it gives the general guidelines for people producing the reference material being used in the PT study. So it gives resource requirements, technical and production requirements, and management system requirements. Again, that's not all of it, but those are the main highlights I got from it as what is important to making sure that these providers of reference materials and the PT studies, they know what they're doing, they have a established procedure in place to make sure that they're producing accurate and valid results for the labs. Yes, Nick?
Just a quick question. When did 3-4 turn from a guide to like an actual?
Within the last year.
Oh, okay, so it's been very.
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe it was an update last year.
Also probably why some people aren't accredited for it currently.
It's still kind of referenced as meets the criteria of, not necessarily, like, a certification would be, or, accreditation, whatever you choose, outside of this space. The 43 would be the certificate, and then you are compliant to the 34.
Okay.
So, as far as the motion goes, we felt that this was in line with our providers for that LAU has approved, because, as I stated, all of them are 43 accredited, and the ones that are also producing are 34 compliant. So we felt that this was just a necessary assurance that the study and the product is what it claims to be.
This is a low-hanging fruit, and looking back at the providers that you have on your approved list, they all fit into these categories in one way or another. It's kind of just
Checking the box.
it's a check. I think it was Jay that said, are they breathing?
Yeah.
This is the are they breathing, so.
It gives us an assurance that they're doing things in sound scientific, sound practice. So we'll talk more about the motion a little bit later if you like, but then we'll roll on into what took up pretty much the rest of the meeting, talking about matrix definitions. We want them to be clear but not overly complex, so that is going to take up a lot of our time making sure that where we make differentiations make sense, that they're grounded in good science, and we're also not creating too many, because we don't want to have too many that this makes this a big convoluted mess.
Can I ask probably going to sound like a very naive question.
Go for it.
Is all this work relative to pesticides in plants, or is it relative to a bigger
Bigger
world?
scope.
Bigger
This
scope.
is for
This
the
would be
PT
everything?
for everything.
Everything, so
For whether
metals
it's
and products, potency and products, okay.
Yeah.
and CBD oil, CBD.
Where, yeah,
So to touch back, with, what was left for the pesticide and flower group, the gold standard or the pie in the sky was, that matrix should be cannabis flower, marijuana flower, and then, it should be in current pesticides, which would be very difficult to produce. So there's one, that's where the gold standard is, to actually get something with incurred pesticides that's meaningful, meaning that it's grown and they are grown into the plant and they are, naturally occur where in parts of the plant where they should. Spikes would just be on top and not be representative of what the product actually comes through the market and looks like and the complexity. So that was the pie in the sky, and we're gonna have to work back from that and figure out like what is the happy medium. We can't get that because we can't.
What's our short-term solution?
Yeah, what's our short-term solution? And there's where the FANOVA came in as a possibility, or a FANOVA-like model.
yeah, we definitely don't want to box ourselves in with FANOVA just because what happens if they go under. I doubt that'll happen, but we want to have a FANOVA-like model is kind of what we want.
They exemplify, something that, seems relatively feasible, but somebody else would come into that market space and.
So again, in this, I know I'm not trying to hop through, but in the next, you're saying like, the conversation was what could be consolidated, what could not be consolidated. Is that partially too because one of the original tenets of this presentation was that this is per product type, per analyte. So you have flower, concentrate, edible, topical, infused, right? Anything new, right? Like, so you have a PT for all required tests for each one of those product types and analyte.
Yeah, that's what that's the dream.
Yeah.
But we realize that might not be feasible to get to that point, but we're trying our best to get as close to that as we can.
I was just thinking about that. We've talked here about commodity groups, right?
Commodities do we think we'll get in the end?
Yeah.
How much we, get granular with that, we might wanna, perhaps adopt something like WSDA, where we rotate through them every year. It
Yes.
might not be feasible to get
Well,
all of them.
they also rotate through because they're only doing like apples so they're on for PDP, they're on a 4-year schedule, I believe. Mike will correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's 3 or 4 a year, so like every 3 or 4 months, it's like, okay, for this quarter you're doing apples, and then the next quarter it's like bananas, and then the next quarter it's frozen strawberries, right? So they're only gonna do the PTs for that like thing they're doing in that time frame, right? So they don't do.
Oh, because of seasonality.
Yeah, I mean, they also don't do apples like every year, right? So those are
Right.
apples like once every like.
So that's
4 years.
probably part of the motivation, they have so many crop commodities.
Yeah.
It's infeasible to do them all twice a year.
Well, yeah, so they're only doing it for the thing they're actively doing for that like time period.
And so if you compare the model of, ecology, where you're gonna break down, probably even concentrate, getting to that gold standard would be concentrate, different types of concentrates, waxes.
types.
They really, really appear and break down and present differently, so getting to that gold standard, that would be nice to really evaluate people, but the reality of achieving that, so there may be a happy medium between, like an agricultural or rotating or representative or,
Some prioritization
Yeah.
you're gonna have to have.
Yeah,
Yeah.
prioritization might be a smart way to think about it too. Some are just more of a priority.
Volume.
volume. And then where like micro, you could do, do we need for a micro test, do we need, cannabis matrix right now? I mean, is that a high priority? Can you?
Right, yeah.
I'm not a microbiologist. Yeah,
question.
Right now, our priorities are pesticides and plants, heavy metals, and potency and products.
So those will be things we touch on at the beginning, but just in general, it's gonna get, in my opinion, it's gonna get really hard when you get to edibles, but I'm not worried about that too much right now. I believe it was Jay who, when we were having this discussion, brought up, certified reference materials. He stated and Steve agreed that there's not really a whole lot of options right now. And then for those of you who may not be know what a a certified reference material is. This is paraphrased from ISO, reference material characterized by a metrologically valid procedure for one or more specified properties accompanied by certification providing the value, associated uncertainty, and traceability of the material. They kind of go hand, those CRMs go hand in hand with PTs. It is, for example, in an environmental lab, a CRM could be a neat standard that comes with a certificate that says it's this analyte at this concentration in solvent or maybe neat, and here's where we got it from, or here's the lot. It provides us with confidence of the accuracy and traceability. And he mentioned that this was very limited right now. It's relative to some, say, environmental work. Yeah. And we got to these kind of 4 action items. We're going to present this motion to you guys. I reached out to Ty Garber to ask the questions we had from the work group. And then this is definitely something to bring up is we really need to get another representative from the labs on this team just to balance out the representation here. And next work group meeting will be February 11th. So looking forward to doing that. So any other questions, action items that anyone wants to talk about?
Just curious, are we soliciting for like, or are we just asking Nick if he wants to be on the PC group, or where are we at on this?
We're gonna get.
There's a section on the agenda.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I got ahead of it. Yeah.
It's nice anyway, but
Okay.
Go there right now.
a little further in the agenda.
Yeah, is it less of an ask and more of a, like a voluntold kind of situation?
We know that.
Okay, so are there any other questions of Ryan that we haven't asked before we get to the motion part? Anybody feel like they are willing and able to make the motion?
So I think I'd like to amend the motion, though, and tell me if I was correct. From what I heard is the established ISO certification that has been around for a while is the 17043, and then the conversation we had about 034, it's that not necessarily would there be yet a certification, but like the standards, the guidelines. So do we need to amend the motion? Because what it said there was like both certs, but are we really saying like the cert and compliant too?
So there was, actually this motion went back and forth a little bit on language, just saying the term certification versus accredited to, and so we had to remove that language because we felt there could be some confusion. We have coined accreditation, and accreditation means something very specific in our WAC, and it's something that ecology does. And so there's a little bit of language. So the compliance is the language exactly from the ISO. It's compliance in, and it's the compliance to these standards. So we took out the accreditation where we might have a little bit of WAC language in ours, forward thinking, that might conflict, and the word certification with, I think,
The way it said there was compliant with.
compliant with.
Yeah. So
That's the language
3,
exactly
3,
from.
4, okay, they don't
Yeah.
really have to have it, they just have to be.
They have to be in compliance with. That's the language from the ISO.
And as a clarification, there's currently not in rule a requirement for 4.3.
Correct.
No, okay. But are the providers that are approved,
Supposedly, yeah.
most of them?
Yes.
I mean, Emerald's
So Emerald
passes through.
would have the 4.3, but not the 3.4.
So they're just providing the study. They're not making the material
I
themselves.
see, okay, yes, I see.
So like absolute standards.
Has the 3.4. Yeah, okay, makes sense.
And this is why we wanted to make sure that we're not forcing them to be both, because right now that's not.
So, given how nascent the industry is, we wondered if maybe it makes sense even on the 4.3 that, you know, if a new provider were to come into the space and didn't have the 4.3 yet, but we're in the process of getting it, would there be some interim, like they could provide their process to the client for consideration as their, you know, and then they have to get it within 18 months or something like that. With the thought that there may be startups that want to come and take this space.
you want me to, me to take
Go
this?
for it.
So, I did think about that, and I was like, well, there are standards for just to certify a company to do another thing, There's the certification to be certified to certify someone,
Right.
And I don't know, who would do that evaluation, and would it be effective to make sure that their process is
Right.
not something, it's not something, that's why I want to take out the word accreditation from this, is that that's not something a college would do.
It sounds like you're proposing that the client would do it,
Yeah, whether we want to put that on the client, that the client may have the discretion to say, you don't have your 4.3 yet. I know you're in the process. We really need this in Matrix. And, just kind of brainstorming, trying to make sure that the doors are open where we need them to be.
If we think about the gold standard, what we're trying to get to,
Sure.
How complicated is it to get 4.3 certification? I mean, is it
I didn't look into that. I mean, I will caveat that we do have providers right now for very specific, and maybe this is something Ryan could check back on, is where we have new, let's say PFAS. Followed any of the news lately, PFAS is in the news. There are few providers of that. Radiological materials, there's some one-offs.
Yeah,
And-
there are
and-
some one-offs.
There's some one-offs, and maybe we could find out the criteria from, at least from our side for LAU, what the one-offs, how we, are all the producers of the one-offs, are they all, have they just stumbled into a product, and then they're like, hey, I got all this radiological, like, this
Yeah.
isotope material that, you guys can use, or are they themselves a provider, or do they need to go and work with a provider or become a provider?
Yeah, if they're trying to make sure I might have to pull up LAU's site, but there is a process that LAU has, there just isn't a PT provider, and I just don't have that memorized exactly what that is.
That's what I was thinking.
There is a
maybe-
process for still being as a lab accredited for something that doesn't have a PT.
And I can speak to that a little bit. We don't have,
Time issue.
PTs for everything. And so there are cases where labs are accredited for certain parameters where there aren't PTs available. And with LAU, what they usually try to do is have, the criteria is to always have 2 PT providers available. Sometimes that can become really challenging if there's one that has become, difficult to work with, but you don't want to drop it because then you lose.
Maybe you don't have to.
Then you can't require PTs if there's only one. So, cannabis obviously is very different because like you said, it is very nascent, and we're, we may not be able to reach the standard that we have for environmental, but we can try to at least outline what that should be and come up with a good short-term solution. Or shorter.
And then I would just throw out the one, the PT is to help provide for accreditation to, that final, like, they can, here's what they said they're going to do, here's the process they're following, and here's the, here's the actual proof that they cannot take it. I understand it's under ideal conditions and, some of these, but here's actually, and I think my thought right now is how do we ensure and what's the process? Because I think it's definitely needed to have that area to be able to be flexible, but I'm just unsure what that process would be, allow that producer that, of that material. How do they, how do you make that determination? So maybe a challenge for us to roll around.
So Nick, you're really asking about the word requirement, right?
Yes.
That's kind of
word
where your focus is.
Whether we want to open it up for the client to have an option for an exception, if needed.
You're comfortable with the first part, that they're compliant with 043, is that right, but not 034? Or did I just?
Well, it looks like there isn't a requirement for 034, except you have to be compliant with it, so you don't need that certification. No, it's on the first one, on 043. I'm just wondering, maybe we only have one provider, and then a second one is like, oh, I'm here, and I'm...
So the 4.3 would actually just be for running the test.
Right.
So, I
So
mean,
if that's easy to get, then
that's-
maybe
that's-
it's a moot point.
that should be
But if it
relatively
takes
easy to
12
get.
months, then
I think that's,
you have to wait 12 months.
we can probably get that information, but I think that's relatively easy to get. Because there's not,
I mean, I'm not pushing it, I'm just, we were brainstorming this morning, just like, what would be a downfall here?
So why don't we add some, or think about adding something like, keep the word requirement in there, or if necessary, approval, something like that by the client. We could do that, so the requirement's there.
Yeah, the
And then,
requirement.
and then, but if, if the client makes a special, consideration, that could open up the, I don't know if that negates the word requirement or not, but.
Well, I wonder if there's another option too, where we could approve this motion, but then this is something that the work group could discuss
Take it back to the
more.
work group, yeah.
And then, well, what I'm thinking is, could the work group discuss more and come up with what would the criteria be for a new PT provider, so that they could maybe get some kind of provisional, I shouldn't use that word, but, interim status where they can provide, but they're working their way
Or
towards
maybe
the
they show,
open.
like, here's our process, and here's our application for the ISO, and we have a scheduled date or something. Yeah, we can bring it back to the work group. I think
But maybe you're not comfortable moving forward with this motion until that's kind of worked out. I don't know.
I'm comfortable with this motion, yeah.
So when we were talking about what we're saying is because it's all in matrix and, I mean, ideally, right, the gold standard, and because things can't cross state lines, and right now there's not an internal, well, what if someone decided to fill in that gap? And then we could have a better, more robust PT program because it's all within the state. How long would we have to wait till that could be an approved program if it's actually better than what we're getting?
Yeah, it wouldn't
And-
suck if we had to wait 18 months even though we knew it was there.
Yeah, so that's why, we just didn't want to lower standards or anything. If it's a better option, is there an approach that we could, kind of an interim, provisional, temporary approval while that provider is working towards us?
So is it likely that that would be a surprise, and we couldn't pre-plan to get these
Well, there's technically not an application process,
compliances?
right? I mean, currently, right? They don't come and show up at the agency and say, we would like to do this thing, right? The way,
How do they get on the list?
so right now, it usually is us consulting with RJ Lee and talking about, and that's at least on the early, they made recommendations based on their knowledge, right, out in the larger industry. And when we moved out to the fore, it's because we solicited that input from RJ Lee, because we had some concerns about monopolies in the market. And so as of right now, I would just, to your point about how would we know, right? Could it be a surprise? Possibly, right? Right, because unless we have like a direct line of communication or like an entry point to begin those, they could be way down the road in doing a thing before they ever engage with the regulatory agency.
yes, sorry, jumped up here. What I just might add is, as it's an integral part of, accreditation, it's having those requirements set of how, this one is a kind of an easy, they must be compliant. I don't think, I don't want to speak for Rebecca or the group, but, if there's not a good available PT, then, at least, or there wouldn't be that requirement, I don't believe. Like, if there's not an available PT, right, there wouldn't be the requirement,
Or
and
if there's only one.
if there's only one, there
And how it
might not
fits
necessarily
environmental.
be that requirement.
Who
It
determines
needs to be a
compliance?
meaningful tool to help accreditation. So then that meaningful becomes that's where that definition of how they become provisional, or how they become in the absence of something that is well-known and industry. In fact, it fits right now over the ones that you've already selected. It fits over all of the ones that are environmental.
I mean, I guess fundamentally, if you wanna be a provider, what is it, 6 months to get one of these? Even if you don't have any paperwork, but you have some magically amazing PT material on your hands, right? You can get your paperwork together, alert an ISO accreditor, PGLA, A2LA, like there's a whole handful of them, and they come in, what, a month, 2 months? and then there's another 90,
Yeah, I mean,
like,
totally,
60 days of review? I
if
mean,
the barrier to entry is low, then.
Yeah.
I don't know, I mean, maybe it's more complicated than that for
Very.
17043, but like,
That's, I mean, that seems like a fairly low barrier
Yeah.
to you just from the private lab perspective.
Yeah, I mean, if that's all it is,
But-
it's probably not a concern.
I mean, that's what, like, the 17025 process is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like nothing to sneeze at, right? It's a huge amount of paperwork, but like, if you are dedicated to doing it, you can
This
pull
is
it
your new
together.
business venture, yeah.
like,
Yeah,
Well, within mind too, that your business
It is
venture
gonna
in
be-
this state is,
yeah.
you got 15 customers.
But that's why we're here, is we're gonna make it more peaceful business to be in.
Well, we could possibly, just as a suggestion, like, because the concept of this, I don't actually have any problem with the concept. I will say, too, as PT group continues forward, I don't know that others feel like we need to send this motion back to be reworked. I don't know that I think that, but, like, the other pieces that would need to be put in place to support this, right? Like, what is the application process, right? To have that actually be, like, a spelled out, right? Again, that it forces that initial.
right, and that's why having the certification is easy. It's like, here's my, you know, piece of paper, okay, you can be part of this or not, and then you don't have to have
You
all
would go on
the
their
people-
website and like,
Yeah.
look, there, you know, and then follow up with them relatively is.
Yeah, I feel comfortable with this motion, or maybe we can take it back to the work group to think about, you know.
Another
Is there any need
motion?
for interim? Is
Yeah.
there any need for us to have an opportunity for interim?
To say, like,
That
if this, then what
There's a lot
other
of
motion?
development that needs to happen before we're actually at that gold standard.
What happens if there's no PT provider, right, then what? Then
There's no PT.
I don't think anybody, like, the labs aren't gonna complain. If there's no PT for
And we have
Actually says that in WAC, it's just like, well, there's just no PT, it's great.
we have a comment from Jeff.
Yes, Jeff, I would like to see all PT providers accredited. Provisional accreditation from client could be okay if we are struggling to find providers.
Say that again.
Provisional accreditation from client could be okay if we are struggling to find providers.
So if you've got a deep bench, you don't necessarily have to go that way, right? If you've got, right, not a whole lot of options, that the client could determine that we will do a provisional in this instance to try to ensure that, right, the standards and rules can be met. Yeah, good thought, Jeff.
So is that a PT thing or is that an accreditation thing?
You would like to see all PT providers.
All.
Oh,
This
But
is-
provisional would,
So the 17043 is accreditation for PT providers. Not something we do, but
okay.
something that.
It's called an
like the provider
accreditation, but we wanted to drop that from the wording because we want to make sure that that's not something that the lab accreditation unit does.
It gets confusing.
We want to make sure that it's appropriately designated to the responsible party performing that accreditation,
Okay.
or that
Oh, so
certification.
did we change a word to compliance? Is that what we did?
Well, that was on the
It was-
ISO
it was on the
website,
white-
right?
yeah.
Can you say that was,
Yep.
that's how
What-
they just.
Yeah, ISO describes it as accreditation, but we felt it was best within the work group
Yeah, I
to
get that.
avoid using that
It
term.
says must be compliant where the
Yeah.
cursor is? Is
Yeah.
that what it said before?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
so
it
it was
was-
compliant both times, so
Yeah.
maybe like, maybe
Yeah.
it's compliant, have to be compliant with it. Okay.
So I just want to check in with Jeff. Is Jeff wanting to amend this motion, make a separate motion, or was it just a thought? You're unmuted, Jeff, if you can,
I have a microphone.
you're able to answer in person. Or you can type. Well, okay. So while Jeff is getting his thoughts together on that question, maybe it's a silly question, I don't know, you guys are the experts.
yeah, his audio's not working.
Okay. So, well, does somebody want, do we,
This is a minor, language edit, but it seems that second part of that sentence needs some cleaning up. Like, there's some extra linking words in there. I think it should read, and if they also manufacture the reference material.
or,
Yeah, so there's an R and a the and an of. Yeah.
if they are also the
And if
manufacturer
they also
of the,
manufacture, and then the next of also delete. Yeah.
and if they also
Yeah.
manufacture the reference material, they must be
Yeah.
compliant with ISO.
Probably would be just
And if they also, yeah, there you go, manufacturer.
Can I ask a question? So are you, because when you read this, it sounds like it's saying they must be compliant, which I think it leaves it open to interpretation whether they should actually be ISO accredited, right? So to some extent, that leaves
Which almost makes the point that we brought
the
up.
temporary,
Yeah,
provisional.
there's room for it.
But if what the true spirit is that they must be ISO accredited, I think it should state that they should be accredited by an ISO agency to clarify.
Accredited or certified, I mean, whatever
Or,
word you
yeah,
use.
by a, and I know why you avoided it, but I think
But
this,
compliance implies that you may not have it.
okay, here's the rules, here's the ISO regulations, we follow it, but I'm not going to go to an A2LA.
We struggled a little bit because even agricultural, they're the ones that pointed out, like, certification is the things that you do, the explanation of certification, and the definition of certification and accreditation, and we'd actually be doing accreditation, they would be accredited here, and, you know, and then if you look at our WAC accreditation, termed by our WAC, we're thinking is already defined as something that ecology does.
State agencies don't do ISO accreditation, do they?
What do you call it? We just
You
need
mean
another
like
word.
they don't accredit?
So we originally had
No.
certified and
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think,
changed.
Ching said it was, she didn't, remembering her email correctly, she didn't want to use certification for the same reason we don't want to use accreditation. So we've got kind of this conflict of what term to use that,
To not be confused that it's something that
Can we
ecology
say, like,
can.
Can you say by an ISO agency, example A2LA, ABNA, you know, whatever, to clarify that it's
Yeah.
not,
or can you just say they have a certificate from,
Or you could say a designation maybe, and an ISO.
they do give you like an official little paper.
I think any of those
Okay, yeah,
would work.
I agree with what you're saying. I think it does, just to say they're compliant, now that you guys have explained that,
Well, the maybe compliance is what we.
I know.
Can we just go with verifiably compliant?
I think the designation
Verified,
word, I think that sounded really good.
Designated as a,
I mean, ultimately, if there's
Oh,
no state
somebody on
agency
WebEx
who's willing
had
to
something.
review the application, you have to go to an accrediting agency to get the stamp of approval, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So,
yeah.
I'm gonna start accrediting for 043, don't worry.
Well, and however, then there's the, like, added,
Okay, we have a
into
comment from
ILAC,
Jeff.
you know, then you add more things to.
Okay, so Jeff is, adding, that he was struggling to hear the difference between compliant and accredited. If compliant, is there a verification that the provider is compliant? Accreditation has a third-party verification of that compliance. Right?
That's what you guys are saying.
That's what
That's what I figured,
Yeah.
just wanted to add
Who
Jeff.
determines that they are compliant?
Right.
So just to be clear, I thought that you were saying, Ryan, that, on the ISO 17043 website, they were not using the term accreditation, they were using the term compliant.
no, they use accreditation on their website.
Okay.
And when I say their website, I mean the website that PT provider has, that has down at the bottom, their like little stamp, it says.
They also use compliance. That was
They
one
use
of the, yeah,
Okay.
compliance.
I remember seeing accreditation, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's compliance squeezed in there and other places.
Can
So
you be
I
as simple as testing providers must have ISO 17043, like,
Have it.
just must have it,
Let's have it.
must have it. Like, you gotta get it from somebody, it's not gonna be us. Right, like,
It could.
What was your word, Kendra?
have it.
Have it.
Testing
Have
providers
ISO.
must have ISO,
I have a suggestion.
17043, and then they, right.
Then we don't leave the window open for the interim.
Here's the suggestion to consider. We could vote on this as is,
Maybe we
but,
should leave it at
but we ask the PT group to go back and do a little bit more work on who determines compliance,
Yeah.
and maybe come back with a motion on that, so that then provides some clarity.
That seems like the best compromise.
Okay. It sounded to me that, like, the work group had discussed that, and they had already determined that it would be one of the ISO 17043, accreditation providers, right?
Sorry, say it again?
Oh, so my understanding is that the work group has already, determined that it would be someone who was already providing ISO 17043 accreditation.
Yes.
So it wouldn't be kicked to the client or to anyone else, it would, is that right?
Yeah, I think that.
Or is that something you guys need to discuss?
No, I think,
Thank you for that.
sorry, I'm verbalizing my feelings right now. So I think what the issue is do they have to be 4-3? Can they be a provisional? Do they have to be 4-3? The 4-3 is just that they can run a program, not that they can produce the material. Just that they can, so we can either separate that out, 4-3, that they can run a program. You don't have to be the producer of a material. And that may answer the provisional. Yes?
I think the real difficulty here is getting material, right?
Getting material. Yeah. But then if there is a provisional in place where we say that you don't have to be 4-3, 3-4 compliant, what does that look like and who allows that? I can tell you who does who accredits, and when you use accredit, not me in ecology, but who accredits to the providers that are 4-3 and 3-4. They are, in this country, they are ILAC, and I should have looked up what the ILAC was, but it's a certified body. It's a body of providers that have come together and they agree to follow in this country a certain set of guidelines that they all perform in the same manner. These providers are A2LA, Harry Johnson, ANAB, there's a whole slew of them.
Yeah,
They are the ones that certify the provider in the 4-3. The cost of that, what that looks like, I don't know. But we can add more language that they, it's stronger to say that they must be ILAC, certified by a ILAC body in 4-3. We can lessen that. We can separate out you don't have to be a provider of both. There's a provisional, I think this leaves it open. This as is leaves it open to then describe some of those other pathways in another motion. That would be my recommendation.
So this is the high level, and then the work group will get together and figure out, okay, does that mean that you have a piece of paper?
How do we implement this?
Yeah.
Maybe some implementation.
Yeah.
Steps. So those would be something for the PT group to.
That would be my recommendation.
Yep. Okay, would somebody like to make the motion then?
So I'll make the motion, to establish a minimum criteria of PT providers, reading as is with those linker words taken out.
Okay. You just.
Do you want me to read it?
Yeah, read it the way you'd like it.
Yeah, this motion would establish the requirement
Take the note.
that cannabis proficiency testing providers must be compliant with ISO IEC 17043, and if they also manufacture the reference material, they must be compliant with ISO 17034.
Okay. Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Any more discussion anybody would like to have? Okay, all those in, did Jeff want to have any more discussion? Okay, just, and Jeff, you can vote, on your chat. So, all those in favor, say aye.
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 All those, did Jeff have a vote? Okay. All those in the room or Ian, Shelley as well. Shelley's also on the phone.
Brad.
And Brad.
Okay.
Thank you. And all those in the room opposed, say nay. And we're just going to wait for Shelley, Brad, and Jeff.
Shelley. Jeff has said yes. Jeff said yes.
Okay, so aye for Jeff, Shelley, and Brad. If you guys can hear us, do you have a vote on this motion?
Shelley says A.
Okay.
Aye.
And Brad?
Yay.
well, the motion's gonna carry, because, but we just wanna make sure that we have all the votes. Okay, great, good job, we're a little bit behind schedule, but, we'll see what we can do to catch up. Okay, so, the next two documents in your packet are from, ones I put together, and the first one to look at is this one, with the boxes and the arrows. So, we at the task force, are talking about this client. It was one of our major motions, and how we're, moving forward with our recommendations. And so, the agencies have been discussing, what the client is and what the needs are. And so, we, right now, Liquor, Cannabis, and Department of Ag are taking the lead in looking at, so we put together a few options for them to consider, and they are now taking the lead in coming up with something that, we think will be workable.
Megan has reached out to the Deputy Director at the Department of Agriculture, and we're working on getting a meeting between the two agencies, that is more operational in nature, right? Like talking about the hows and the whys, like would there be budget provisos required, right? How would that function, actually have a
right? So that we can put into place. So what this was just my, it was my take on, and it's a draft, and so I want to put this in front of everybody for you guys to see if you agree with ecology's thinking on this. But the first one is sort of just, this is currently what is going on. We have Liquor, Cannabis, and Department of Health that are have product standards and lab protocols in rules. Labs are now, they initiate accreditation requests using those protocols. They submit fees and accreditation to the accreditor, RJ Lee, and this is sort of how the communication piece works. And on the back side is the sort of where we are with where we're going, and I just wanted to do a check-in with the task force on that. So there we still have Liquor, Cannabis, and Department of Health with their rulemaking authorities, where they are putting product standards and lab protocols in their rules. And then there's a client that has an interaction with both LCB and Department of Health, and that it provides that function. We talked about a few meetings ago, I think it was in October, what are the properties of the client? It may have been November, but we have a document there about client properties and what they needed to be. We talked about a state, some kind of governmental body with authority and expertise to be able to have these conversations. And then the lab would basically do the same thing, but now the accreditation, there's a line there that kind of separates out the accreditation from that process. And that would be ecology, and ecology has its WAC. It would be, the accreditation would still be dependent on the product standards and the lab protocols that are in the Liquor, Cannabis, and Department of Health WACs, but the accreditation requirements would be maintained in ecology's WACs. So that's sort of the model that we see we are developing relative to the current model.
The only edit I might suggest is you might want to specifically identify what large topic header that the proficiency test falls under, just so that there's a connection back to the topics that we're discussing as the group, so wherever that falls.
Say that again? So we're not on this one yet. We're going to get to this in a second. We're talking about this one. Sorry. I switched them on you.
Okay.
I switched them on you. But so that was sort of how we see the client fitting into this functional model in the process.
So it'll be the same feedback, like wherever PT falls in this chart, again, you'll just want to for the connection back to the things that'll be in the report and those kind of things.
Yep. So, okay, that's good feedback, and we'll work on incorporating that. So the second The second item, so that one was fairly quick. Does anybody have any other
Quick
feedback?
clarification, you
Yeah.
had mentioned that it was the LCD and the Department of Ag that were partnering up as the client,
On the
or
client, on defining what that,
on defining what the
what
client
that looks like and how it would
You're
function
meeting
operationally?
with Department of Agriculture, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So likely though, when we left the meeting, that health will be involved in those conversations.
Gotcha.
But like the two deputies that are starting the, like, let's get this organized are Megan Duffy, our deputy at LCB, and the deputy, Patrick, thank you, I was like, at Department of Agriculture.
Yes. And we're very appreciative of the agencies partnering up to help do that.
Is there a thought about where CPC does fall in this?
I sort of had that thought on the second sheet, but I hadn't had it on the first sheet. So, we could go over, go ahead.
PT would generally fall with accreditation.
So the PT recommendations and motions then would fall on the ecology side? And the the analytical work group, lab testing protocols would fall under, one of these boxes on the left. Because those are, recommendations that we would want, if they were gonna be put into rule, have to be put into rule through LCB and Department of Health rulemaking. So the ones,
And the ecology just accredits to those ones.
and ecology will accredit to the ones that are in the rule, that end up in the rule, right?
For proficiency testing, we define what that program looks like, what the criteria are.
Twice a year,
Ecology,
once a
so I think
year,
that's
yeah.
where Sarah's coming from.
It falls
that
under
would fall-
accreditation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Testing is part of accreditation, okay.
Right.
Not a client responsibility.
Generally, no.
Not according to this model, right? Any comments from the phone?
Shelley just, said thank you to Kendra for explaining.
Okay, great. Okay, so then, if we move to the next one, this one has, so on the one page, without the lines, this is sort of the current organizational model. When thinking about the timeline, in order to try to understand how we can shorten the timeline, so when we met in December, we created on the whiteboard, we kind of talked about how we could stage our work, so we might be able to shorten the timeline. We might not have to wait to start heavy metals and potency, until after July. We could maybe start now, use synergy of the work groups that are already in place. And so we could shorten some of the products that the task force is creating by just being a little more aggressive with our schedule, and we wrote that out. But there are other components to when things can be put into place, and that involve the rulemaking, and that was the piece that we're not in charge of, but we'll have something to say about that. So this handout was just to try to help me think about the timeline and those parts. So and also to kind of get my head wrapped around the different elements that we're addressing. So on the first page, we basically have the product standards. These three bins here are not new. They were in the first report that was created in 2018. They're basically a product standard, and then there's lab testing protocols, like how are we going to tell whether or not the product standards are met or not, and then there's the accreditation requirements, and currently all of those are under LCB and DOH rules, and where we're trying to go is to move the accreditation piece out and into ecology, and product testing and laboratory testing protocols, product standards and laboratory testing protocols would still remain under LCB and DOH. So what this did was identify for me that in the WACs, in the rules currently under LCB and DOH, there's a mixture of product standards, lab testing procedures, and accreditation requirements. And so there's a need for those rules, because this is sort of the admin part that may not sound very exciting to most folks, but we need those rules sort of to get separated out so that they're in the right spot, so we don't end up with competing rules. So we need all the accreditation rules to happen, to come over to ecology, and then the product standard and lab testing rules to stay, and maybe perhaps get updated with the work that we're doing, but stay with the Department of Health and laboratory, like for cannabis. And so what that brings in is there's a staging of rulemaking in order to get there, and that could and will definitely affect whether or not the timeline, when we can get this, because for us to implement this House bill, you know, we need those rules separated out. We need the product standards updated and we, you know, keep the accreditation level as high as, and the confidence in the accreditation, you know, need those to stay to
Bring it
be
up to the
updated,
standard of
which the client piece will help us do. So that was that piece, and I kind of just wanted to check in on other folks' understanding to see if I got that right. If this is the right story for that, because this will be when we go in front of the legislature. If we need to give a summary, these are the things that we'll be talking about. So. If there.
Are you anticipating going in front of the legislature for this session?
It hasn't been asked for, so, but there is a new chair for the Commerce and Gaming Commission, and he hasn't asked for an update, but, I mean, I want to be ready if that is requested, so.
My little head shake, this is 100% personal opinion. Short session.
They're busy. They already have like 20 cannabis bills.
Yeah, and so it was just kind of like knowing like how deep that bench is on those cannabis bills. Like last year, there were quite a bit more work sessions, even in the fall and kind of tail end of the long session. So I would imagine that people will want to know. Just personal opinion, I'd be surprised, but I've been surprised before.
But I just wanted to be ready so that, and make sure that I was speaking for the task force. So I wanted to lay this out, because this is sort of the story as I understand it.
I mean, me personally, I just reiterate, you know, I think it'd be smart to put PT on both of these, wherever it appropriately belongs, which it sounds, PT and accreditation are kind of.
Yeah, I actually just looked up this WAC 17350 because I was unfamiliar, and there is, the -070 is a PT section. Part of it.
So I mean, I had originally thought PT recommendations would go under, PT changes would go under the ecology side of things and the OG, but I wasn't 100% sure that was 100% correct. So I kind of left it a little bit more blank, and just let the task force recommendations would affect both of these boxes. And that's how I kind of tried to address that.
Yeah, I think task force recommendations affect all the boxes.
I don't know that we're affecting product standards. I think we're just kind of focusing on the protocols. Right. And then, so just to get, I think we're back on track now, and I know we want to get to the potency work group solicitation criteria, but I also want us to think about, we have a number of parking lot items, and some of the things that we talked about in terms of like sampling and those kinds of things, we're not addressing in this task force, but in the report, we might want to identify those so that they don't get lost. And so I just want folks to think about that, and I know those were important, and I didn't want them to fall off the parking lot.
What's the count of total parking lot? I know there's some that are gnarly, but like, it's low digits, right? Like 4 or 5?
It's low digits.
Yeah,
I think we identified them.
I mean, there's
day one.
Yeah, there's some minor little things, and then there's, about 5 or 6.
The big one, right? And then the action limits is the other, like, hairy ball of wax.
Are you able to list them for us, Sarah, just as a reminder? I know
the office is well, there's, for the side is the traceability and the reporting, the database. which then spurs all the little conversations about action limits and reporting requirements.
traceability.
I
Yeah.
can talk about traceability.
No, I was thinking about it this morning, I was like, I haven't been angry about leaf in a while.
Yes, leaf.
I got some things.
But I don't wanna like forget about it. Still terrible.
You want some things to be angry about? We'll send them over.
Traceability 2.0, jump on the convo.
The sampling,
Ooh,
sampling design,
samples just show up. I don't know how they get there.
I'm knee deep right now in the weeds of just the minor issues, not, and so I can't give you the final roll-up.
And it's okay if we don't have it now, but would you guys send us a note just so as a reminder, like?
And it will be, you will see them in the report, it's just, you know, they're introduced as just little annoyances in the work group, they start manifesting themselves as a bigger issue, and I just haven't written the story of how many places, you know, that they come up and like, wow, this is actually, these are all tied in as, you know.
And that's why we put them in the parking lot, why we don't want to forget about them.
And they're-
We don't want to
I've got, yeah, I've got them
not do
highlighted,
the focus on their things, right?
I've got them highlighted.
What, like, category you're putting them under, or is that premature? Because you don't quite know how often they come up. Is it like a, you know, outside our scope of recommendation section, or is it
The things that we recognize for the consumer, we're trying to improve consumer protection. That's what we're trying to do. And this is one piece of doing that.
So we
But there are other, we recognize that there are other things that also need to be addressed. But I think we just want to make sure there's a place that our good thinking is captured.
So, I mean, I can share with you that, I mean, the legislative report is to address what was mandated. So first and foremost, you will see in the report what is mandated, and then along the way, and the story of how we got there and what the decisions that we made, and here's the major motions, and here's the major issues that came up, and here's where they came up, and you will see them probably repeated. I mean, right now, this is still draft, but you will see them repeated, and, you know, like, because of this conversation, it's going to be on the forefront of everybody's mind, and where that gets, if there's a summary of it, wherever it gets moved up higher, you know, that may, but I have them all listed throughout in several places. It's just, you know, how they fit into the legislative mandate, they will be in there, you will see them, but where that fits.
Okay. So let's go ahead and move on to potency. And I think,
We have a report timeline update.
oh, sorry,
Yeah,
a report time update.
Yeah,
Then we're a little further behind than I thought. Okay.
Quick, so.
and this is just quickly, just as a reminder, we are here.
Moving through.
And the task force review is still scheduled for the beginning of March. So expect to see that. You know, this is where that client piece that Ag and LCB are working on will be delivered, you know, set to be delivered on April 1st, I believe.
On or
that-
before?
Yeah, on or before, hint, hint, wink, wink. You know, but I've got a placeholder for that in the report. So, you know, when the reviews go on, the major reviews, that won't necessarily be in there. And then we'll have time for review by the task force. And then optional, we have the next task force meeting in March, lands on March 16th. So there's an opportunity while you're reviewing the document to maybe discuss it as an agenda item. And then I'll incorporate comments also in March for the whole March, just think the report.
There will be nose to the grindstone.
Yeah, well, as soon as I hand it to all you guys, you'll take maybe a day off and
Maybe an afternoon.
And then it'll progress through this timeline here that we have on the screen, our publications, government relations, governor's office, and hopefully off, and it'll be nice and easy and go smooth. And that's all I have.
Any questions about the timeline? Okay, let's move on to the solicitation. So I'll just let Jessica take over there.
All right.
So, we're getting ready to launch the solicitation for the potency work group. So what I wanted to do is just bring in front of you guys, the criteria that we used when we were, for those of you who saw the survey that we sent, the original survey we sent out when we were recruiting for, the other work groups, pesticides and proficiency testing, but, so this was, and you guys have this in your packet, the more detailed questions that are in here. All right, so it might be easier, it's up here, but it might be easier to just look at the packet. So the first one, pretty simple, tell us about yourself, who are you? What are you interested in? Are you interested in the task force, or do you want to be involved other ways? And then the next one is, there will be lots of different focus areas to participate in. Tell us what you're interested in. I've got a big list here. Describe what interests you about participation. And then what's your area of expertise? So the last solicitation was very focused on getting the right expertise. And I think that with potency, we will have a lot of crossover with the organic chemists. We were kind of, previously targeting organic chemists that had experience doing pesticides, laboratories that were doing pesticides. So, scrolling down here, you can see we were trying to get an idea of what people were working in, or what they were educated in. Organic chemists, microbiologists, toxicologists, et cetera, et cetera. Number 7, what do you have experience in? Quality assurance, field sampling, laboratory testing. I mean, at this point when we were sending this out, we really didn't know, we didn't know the labs very well, and so some of these questions may not be as relevant now, so that we have a better handle on who's interested. We didn't know if we were going to get 500 responses or 10 responses. I think we have a better idea at this point. So, number 8, we were trying to get an idea on backgrounds. Of course, we were more interested in people who had agricultural testing backgrounds, because it's a plant, and we were doing the pesticides in plants first. Number 9, this was about your bench level lab testing experience. So similar to the previous one. Scroll down to number 10. We were asking about experience in standard methods. What were you, what if for folks that did have lab experience, was it with AOAC methods or DOD methods or FDA? Then it gets into the more specific, do you work for an accredited cannabis lab now? And then number 12, is this lab, the lab that you're currently working at or you own, is it accredited for pesticides?
So what we're looking for is to maybe update this,
Right.
make it relevant to the potency questions. That's what we want to do today.
So that's really the first one where, that I would think about changing, is just changing it to potency instead of pesticides.
Yeah, and I think the next one, just change it, are you willing to share your methods with?
Right. Yeah.
If we want to make this like a little bit more for the future, but for metals too,
Just maybe your lab
Oh, you
methods?
try to capture it all in
Yeah.
one survey.
Yeah, just like, are you willing to
Capture.
share your lab methods?
yeah. Because I imagine that just noticing the space of individuals leaving the work group, that possibly we will need to send this out again because the participants may have changed or look different.
And for that reason, that makes me want to just ask about potency right now, because when we're starting metals,
I thought they were all
when we solicit for metals, I mean, there may be changeover between now and then, right? What did we have for our timeline as far as soliciting for metals?
That we were gonna run at least 2 concurrent.
But we
Metals
can
was
get,
gonna start, right, after July,
Oh, after July.
or when Sarah's time would be more.
Okay. You still have things here.
Okay, that's fair.
We're not that far off.
So I don't know that I think you needed it as a question, but, in the solicitation of, we've talked about this, we had some individuals asked to be on work groups that admittedly I was probably the vocal who said no. Vendors or no, right? I don't consider work groups a place to do R&D for like equipment and those kind of things. We're definitely soliciting.
business cards.
Right, those kind of things. And so we had some, and so I don't think it has to be in the questionnaire, but maybe possibly just kind of on the leader or wherever this is posted, like again on the purpose of, right, the type of individuals we're soliciting. Because those individuals, vendors, others, absolutely, right, can come to this meeting, right, or listen in on this meeting. This is an open public meeting. But the work group stuff they're not subject to the same open public meeting requirements. And I just don't want to, right, get that askew. We didn't have a huge slew of those. We handled, and they came through Jess and through ecology, and we handled those on the one-offs. But I just was thinking about it again, and too, there were some comments at the last steering committee meeting. It happens that people are like, well, hey, you guys are tackling waste. Not the scope of this meeting, right? So make sure that we're trying to help be clear about what we're recruiting for, so, just.
Yeah, I get calls for all things cannabis, which is kind of interesting, and I just put them over to Kendra. But just, I think folks tend to want to group everything together. But I think I had, so those will be the kind of things that I'll try to capture, and we'll work together closely, in the email when we send out the solicitation, what the task force does, what this work group will do. We had some things in there about the time commitments and, what we're looking for. But do you guys have any other, so other than changing the, pesticides to potency,
I mean, all
do you guys have
the
anything
labs have potency
Yeah, that's
information.
why I'm like, it's not.
So, but I'm wondering if we maybe put in 12, like a check all of the things you're accredited for, right? I
Okay.
mean, obviously cannabinoids and microbial, like all of the labs have a base accreditation, right? That's my understanding. And then there's optional pesticides and metals.
And terpenes are optional.
And terpenes
And
are
that's
optional.
Going out for, if we're gonna also pull for the PT group, because the PT group, can have a wider set, and so we could
And then
have a
it's
metal
just like a plain question, it's not like a.
a metals chemist or, another microbiologist or.
Yeah.
And I do think, I don't know if you might have already captured it, just, the suggestion from Amber on making sure we ask a question or in some way acknowledge, are you willing to share your methods? Right, because this is that kind of work, and if they're not willing, then it's not the most effective conversation.
Not helpful.
Right, and people can make that
Yeah, I
choice.
think you can just make it general, maybe not even potency methods, but methods in general. And then if they check the metals box and they check they're willing to share their methods, you can say, oh, maybe you can serve on the metals work group, or when we get to that point. Like, it's an easier way of binding people, I guess, rather than focusing only on potency.
And that's what we did last time, is we didn't ask people to apply for a specific work group. We took everything, and then we kind of said, okay, I think this person would be best here and here and here, and then ask them if they would be willing to do that.
So this is not just as a food for thought, this is a parking lot, but I'm just thinking about that heavy metals conversation again. So in our current landscape, we have 2 labs that have that heavy metals accreditation. So when we get down to that place where we're thinking about it on how else do we want to staff into that place, again, to the conversation about, it's not necessary do you do it right now, but like, right, the expertise and the thought process behind it, but just as not a deep of a bench as far as labs who might choose. So that could be an incorrect.
Anticipate the survey will go out?
June, yeah.
For metals.
For heavy metals.
Potency, pretty quick.
We put selection in June, and we put solicitation in May. And I think we put April is when the state committee talk.
So just a couple
But
months.
potency, we're gonna send out now, basically,
So I think
February.
the question doesn't ask what you're accredited to now, but will you be accredited to in the next 12 months?
Yeah, add a
You
second
just filed your
one.
Sierra 102, and I bet you've got multiple labs that are now looking at that.
Yeah, there could potentially be a couple folks that plan to do it in the
That
next 6
field's
months.
gonna get wider.
And then, if they are in the process of doing that, they probably
February.
have, hopefully have someone on staff that knows about it.
Fair, good call.
Is there, like, not guaranteed, but, you know, ideally, gold standard.
Gold standard, okay.
Is it worthwhile adding another one at the end of just an open-ended, is there anything else you'd like to add to bolster your application? Or, like, when I filled this out, I was sort of like, is there a
Yeah.
place to put my CV, or like, you know, anything, like, I don't know, I also have experience doing this, but none of these questions capture that, I don't
So
know.
all the questions have the other,
Okay.
and that's a text box. And
Okay.
so a lot of folks did, you know, fill in with, you know, additional information. So you'll see that with, a lot of these with questions 3
Yeah.
and 6 and 8 and 9 and 14. So I think I could add more just to try to get more.
I mean, I guess I wasn't part of the selection process at all, and how, like, was it easy to know who these people were? You didn't need CVs or resumes?
I think for the most part, they were known, right, at least
Yeah.
you were LCB, right? And some of the work that Ecology had done when they were drafting that initial accreditation report, they had a chance to have interactions with a number of representatives from labs. There were very few that we didn't know, or, you know, and had at least an opportunity to have had conversations with. It was really kind of those who emailed in after, right, in more that vendor space, and in some of those cases, we did ask for a resume or a CV to at least try to validate, kind of like the, hey, you're not a known entity, could this work? Most of the time, it came back from like, no, you are a vendor. So, yeah.
So is there on SurveyMonkey, is there a way to upload a file, or would that, people just send it if they wanted to?
I don't think there is.
I mean, if we don't really anticipate any more unknown, like, really wild card unknown applicants.
Well, you guys mentioned that potency was gonna elicit a lot of interest.
Yeah, I think you're gonna get a lot of interest. I think you're gonna get a lot of parking lot interest.
I think you get a lot of interest,
Like,
but
potentially
And
non-lab.
ultimately, the analysts.
But are we gonna need CVs to help us figure that out?
To Kendra's point, like, I generally know most of the lab employees at this point. Like, I may not know, like, all of your analysts, but I definitely know all of the labs and probably all the directors and most of the senior scientists at this point, so.
But we're also looking for academia,
Yeah,
and.
we didn't get a lot of that though, right? Like,
We didn't.
to Kendra's point, like, most of the people that were in selection were people we knew. Very few were people we didn't know, like.
Well, and you
had
could always
not
follow
met.
up to give you their email address in the first question. So you
Yeah.
can always just-
If we have a flyer. I know sometimes I might be a little bit repetitive, so again, I think the place to really focus is because people are interested in potency, but to remind people, this is not about the rule about potency.
Yeah, we might wanna just.
Right?
Like,
This
about
is
the method strictly.
just on
Yeah,
how you
Like,
test.
the most boring of the
You get a
chemistry.
lot of like, oh, we need labels, you know, there's gonna be a lot of
Unless
sample
you're a chemist.
selection.
Mhm. Yeah.
And that was something we were definitely very kind of heightened awareness about last time, and I think I captured that in the email part, you know, when I sent out the link, tried to make it sound as, you know, technical and scientific as possible, just so folks didn't look and say, you know, thinking this is a place to lobby or to try to sell stuff, or, you know, we're really just gonna talk about the science.
Yeah, we don't, I mean, that's just a waste of their time, right?
Great.
And that's not necessary. So,
But I'll-
I think it's a good idea to
Again.
just have an introductory paragraph about the purpose and the scope, so that people understand what this is. Okay, so, good discussion. I think that we have a good idea about how to move forward with that, SurveyMonkey.
I wasn't clear though, do you guys want me to request resumes? Because I could certainly request that people send them. Might be a little overwhelming if we get 100 resumes. necessary. I guess we look at it as.
I would say you don't have to look at them all.
Yeah, I think if it works the way you guys did it.
To sort something out.
Just make, definitely what you want them for the, if we have some good candidates, we think, we want this to invite this one. I think the resume, just to make sure we're, not getting someone, a vendor or someone with it, who's not really gonna focus on this mission.
So I do think we put in a question that said, are you from the lab, are you, then we had some, like, you have to answer this question before you move on.
Yeah.
Like, you have to tell us,
It's
you can't be, you can't be. I think we had a couple of those where, like, you have to say one way or the other, in there, to try to avoid getting.
Number six.
Right.
It's number 6.
Yeah. Right.
And
Well,
then
and also question one, asking what
There's
company you work for.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Right.
right off the bat, or,
Yeah.
Right.
To try to identify, because the spreadsheet got kind of overwhelming, and I immediately looked, the first thing, like, they didn't want to be involved. They just want to be informed. So then I filtered on that, and then I just
Right.
progressively went through the filters on it.
Right.
And I don't know if, because I went through it, I like handed my first, this is my first thought, too, and then the task force did the rest, and here's my first thought, and I relatively easily went through and was like, yes, no, yes, no, just because they answered the high up question that just kind of, they didn't want to be involved, they,
Yep.
they don't have a pesticide,
Maybe one of the things we can do too, I think it was a good process, right? First out of the gate, I think it was a good process, but maybe one of the things that we can do from the LCB side, because we directly communicate with the labs, is again, just remind them of this, and that to have that discussion internally at the lab, right? Because this is a time commitment. And for individuals that have participated, right, on where they might staff in the past that they have not, right? On a work group level versus, some of these other conversations that we're having. So we can help maybe and do something a little bit different there that we didn't do last time as well.
Thanks for that, that'd be great. So, Jessica will be in touch with you about what that looks like.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Great. Okay, we are back on schedule. We're a little ahead of schedule. This is good.
all right.
Do we want to take a short break, or do we want to power through?
I vote power through.
Yeah, okay, all right. Well, if anybody does need, down the hall. You have the down the hall option. Okay, so the next item are the work group changes.
All right. So, we have a few work group changes, and I wanted to pull up the charter language just to kind of refresh everybody, since it's been a very long time since we thought about what we have in the charter. So what we have in there under 3.3.1, the steering committee will support and guide the work of the task force and will approve any changes to work group members. And changes to work group members must originate from the work group and will be brought to the steering committee by the work group lead based on business needs. So we have a couple of changes. The main one, the main one that we want to talk about today is what Brian brought, that we've had someone leave the proficiency testing work group. And so we wanted to ask about soliciting for an additional member. So if you guys approve, I will, with this solicitation, we can choose someone to join one or two people even, to join the proficiency testing work group.
Just as a wonder on that, because I think it makes sense, are you asking for just kind of open-ended versus hey, we would go, right, Tabor represented from Praxis, we would go back to Praxis and ask if they wanted to re-support that work group. So are you just saying, hey, we're just asking for we're in for that, and then you'll make the decisions on how to approach?
I'm really asking for guidance, because this is all of the guidance we have from the charter on that. What do you guys think?
I will tell you, there's a piece of me that says, right, either could work, right? And that first direct is hey, Tabor, part of the reason he was there is because of the work in his experience with Praxis. We could reach back out to Praxis and ask directly, or just open it back up to those we had already solicited from that original group. that maybe weren't on a work group for a number of reasons. So I think it can go many, many ways. Admittedly, and not, I mean, to date, the proficiency group has met less frequently than at least the analytical group did in the past. I don't know, it might be crystal balling this, but like, are you anticipating that kind of cadence, or you're really expecting, right, that there's going to be kind of a more regular cadence from this point forward? More regular?
I think it will be more regular because we have Ryan on board.
Yeah, from where I'm standing, I want this to be a regular meeting, so I think we've got our next one scheduled for the 11th, so that's a 3-week gap, and at this point, I think that timing works just about right, with what's within our scope of responsibility.
When did you last meet?
The 21st,
So, okay.
Tuesday of last week.
My thought on whether we, on the PT group, and that was kind of the question I was asking early on, is, is PT just pesticides and plants, or is it bigger? Because now we're going bigger.
Bigger
And
and bigger.
Right.
I think we talked about pesticides and products as being sort of the ongoing Mike Furman-led group. That was sort of the dual, right?
Yeah.
And then going to potency, and then stagger the heavy metals a little bit later to give Sarah a chance to breathe. So because we're broadening out, it kind of feels like, we ought to be more broad, because we want the help, and it's not just the pesticides and plants anymore.
So maybe pulling it from the potency solicitation might be the way to go.
Yeah, we were gonna
I think it's a
suggest,
good starting place.
just going out to all the labs, just listening, hey, you got someone you wanna put up
Right.
for the PT work group, but that's a good idea, we just put that survey out and draw from that
Yeah.
survey.
Same questions, and, yeah, I mean, if,
So just be part of the recruitment for potency.
Yeah.
I mean, the reason I asked when you last met was, like, how recent was Tabor leaving, if they really wanted to be a part of it, they would potentially put someone else on it, but if they haven't been, if you haven't reached out to them, it's probably fallen through the cracks, right?
And it's really
And they have an
specific.
opportunity to
Right, they
fill out
can,
the survey.
yeah, they
Yeah.
can fill out the
Yeah,
survey.
fill out again and participate again. But we are trying to get as broad as possible because of where we're headed.
It's really specific to the expertise. So we didn't want folks to just swap different people in and out, because we want, especially with, I think you can just see from everything we've done with the analytical work group, there's just, the learning curve is so steep, and getting everybody on the same page, we just didn't want to have people coming in and out.
Yeah, keeping the same faces would be good.
The other thing that I'll mention, Tanya's here, is that Tanya will be continuing with the analytical work group. Her
Yay.
role has changed, but she'll be continuing. Oh, crap. I'm sorry.
Oh, your mind skipped.
What am I doing now?
Your apology. You're now.
You're probably looking at me thinking,
You're the
sorry. Sorry.
Julie Kowalski.
Julie Kowalski. Sorry. I think I did a Suzaki at Kowalski mix-up there.
Yeah,
Sorry about that. But Julie will be continuing with
but she's still with Trey.
analytical work group. No, she's changing roles, and I don't know what her new role is, but she's been really valuable to that work group. And the way that the charter's written, it allows her to continue.
She's still with a lab? Would that be the first time lab?
What's that?
Is she still with a lab?
That is a good question.
She's just moving on to something different.
Oh, she might even be out of the cannabis thing. I think Julie's great.
I think she's willing to continue. She was willing to continue on the group since her presence was there, and I think that's what we felt as well. There's one other.
And then there's one other person that has left the analytical work group, but we still have a good balance between the agencies and the lab. So it's actually a better, more equal balance now. So we felt that was that was fine not to replace, because it will be hard to bring new people in on pesticides that haven't been through the last 6 months. So that was kind of a non-topic, but if you guys are on board with bringing 2 new people into the proficiency testing work group and getting it through the potency solicitation, that's the main action, and I'll just move forward with that.
Can I make a suggestion on that maybe? Is if you're looking for a lab, because I don't know when this is going to go out and how soon you'll get responses, it might be worth it reaching out to all the labs if they want to nominate someone to the proficiency group, and then you can go over the credentials, but then you'll have a very focused set that maybe you can draw from
Yeah, because the survey's not
before.
going out until May, right? So they'll.
This will go out sooner, for potency comes out sooner.
Oh.
It was heavy metals that won't go out till
But
May.
since you guys are meeting on the 11th, I mean, that might be a little soon to get someone in, but you might be able to get someone in to
For the
even
next-
come to the next
for the next
meeting if it's a very focused group from the lab or, you know.
That
maybe-
was my hope, is that, I didn't think we'd be able to get someone in by the 11th, but my hope was that we could get it in by our next meeting, whether it's 2 or 3 weeks after that.
Okay,
That's it.
just about. I just want to remind folks that, of the dates that we have dates picked through June.
Yeah.
Probably starting in March, I'll start looking forward, to more. Because we're still in a little bit of transition, our next meeting is, February 20th. And the PT work group is meeting on the 11th, so there may be something there, and I'm not sure where the analytical work group is working on now, starting the pesticides and products, but
The meeting is February 12th.
great, okay. So there may be, next meeting may be a little more potential than today's, but again, we're in that transition. So we have January 30th today, February 20th, March 16th, April 16th, May 18th, and June 24th, and I'll ask Alyssa just to resend those out so everybody has those on their calendars. And I think we are now in the public feedback session. So we have 2 folks in the room that fall into that category. Is there any feedback you'd like to provide? Great, okay. Do we have anyone on the phone who would like to provide some feedback or has indicated that they would? Not yet. Okay. Anything else for the good of the order? All right, well, I think we did some good stuff today, and appreciate everybody's time, and this meeting is adjourned.